Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a space where self-care becomes part of your day. A space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Kortni Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 87. I'm Dr. Kortni Alston. I am so happy that you're here. Thank you so much for listening. So today, what we're going to talk about is mental health at work. And it is inspired by a Harvard Business Review article that was published in October of last year with the headline, "It's a New Era for Mental Health at Work." It is written by Kelly Greenwood and Julia Annas. And you can read the full article on drkortnialston.com/podcast/episode 87. That's drkortnialston.com/podcast/episode 87. So the article addresses several studies and reports on mental health. And what I really love so much about this article that is really impactful in terms of a discussion is really looking at the data as it relates to mental health at work and how it is really affecting the workplace. So Greenwood and Anas discuss how more employees are leaving for more mental health reasons. And some of those causes are overwhelming, and they also mention how it's unsustainable in terms of its work. They share various various data points in regards to this article. They mention in regards to about 68% of millennials and 81% of Gen Zers have left roles for mental health reasons. 68% of millennials and 81% of Gen Zers have left roles for mental health reasons, both voluntary, involuntary, compared with 50% of respondents overall. Now, 91% of respondents believe that a company's culture should support mental health, and that is up by 86% in 2019. And so I really also treasure that they're talking about not only the data, but even more as it relates to some of these challenges. And this is what they say about mental health challenges are now the norm among employees across all organizational levels. They also shared how 61% of respondents reported at least one symptom of a mental health condition in the past year. Now, that is up by 59% in 2019. Now, they say it's not surprising due to many macro stressors. Now, it supports the notion that mental health challenges affect nearly all of us on a regular basis. They also began to break it down in terms of the article as it relates to widespread disclosure, diversity, equity, and inclusion implications, and even talking about how employers can benefit from supporting mental health at work. One of the things they share as it relates to widespread disclosure is talking about how more employees are talking about mental health at work, which is great, right? That there's really more of a conversation being shared as it relates to mental health at work. One of the things that I really treasured is having a conversation with an individual recently who shared with me how they were having a conversation with their supervisor as it relates to their well-being. And I go, wow, this is really powerful that they're having this conversation in regards to their own mental health at work. So in the article, it talks about how nearly 2/3 of respondents talked about their mental health to someone at work in the past year. Now, they mentioned how this is an important direction in it being the right direction, especially in terms of reducing the stigma, right? Which can affect one's willingness to seek treatment. And they also shared that 49% of respondents described their experience of talking about mental health at work as positive. 49% of respondents described their experience of talking about mental health at work as positive. I treasure that. And they also mentioned how they receive positive or supportive responses, which is comparable to 2019. So this is really a great step in the right direction, right? I love that they're talking about the fact of reducing the stigma. I love that we're talking about the value of really sharing, having that discussion as relates to mental health at work, and then what that can mean overall. And I value that the fact it has been positive as it relates to their studies. So they also talk about um, diversity, equity, and inclusion implications. And they mentioned demographics and continue to play a strong role in workplace mental health, with younger workers and historically underrepresented groups still struggling the most. Now, millennials and Gen Zers, as well as LGBTQ plus, Black, Latinx respondents were all significantly more likely to experience mental health symptoms. And they talk about how, like millennials and Gen Zers and caregivers, respondents, that members of historically underrepresented groups were more likely to leave roles for mental health and to believe that a company's culture should support mental health. In fact, 54% of all respondents said that mental health is a DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion issue. And this is an increase from 41% in 2019. This is great in terms of a step in the right direction of really making sure that workplace well-being, that mental health at work is at work, right? So all of this is extremely important. So they also talk about employers benefit from supporting mental health at work. And they found that employers who have really supported their employees with the pandemic, racial injustice, return to office planning, and or mental health overall, have a better mental health and engagement outcomes. So here's an example they gave. They said workers who felt supported with their mental health overall were 26% less likely to report at least one symptom of mental health condition in the past year. Respondents who felt supported by their employer also tended to be less likely to experience mental health symptoms and less likely to underperform and miss work, and more likely to feel comfortable talking about their mental health at work. So in addition, they have had higher job satisfaction and, get this, intentions to stay at their company. Good things, right? Good things. And lastly, they had more positive views of their company and its leaders, including trust of their company and being proud to work there. And this reinforces the tie between workplace culture and its ability to support mental health at work when it's done with intention. So I also value this that they've shared in the article. And these are some of the things to think about in regards to creating change. And again, if you want to read the full article, feel free to go to drkortnialston.com/podcast/episode 87. Again, that's DRKORTNI ALSTON untitled.com/podcast/episode 87. So they mentioned three elements that we're going to go into in regards to the article itself in terms of effectuating change. And they say a big part of that is a change in culture. So they say culture requires both a top-down and a bottom-up approach to succeed. Organizations have to train leaders, managers, and all employees on how to navigate mental health at work and have difficult conversations and create a supportive workplace. See, managers are often first line in noticing changes and supporting their direct reports. And building an environment of real psychological safety is key. Mental health policies, practices, and really cultural competent benefits and other resources, they say, must be in place. And I love this. They don't just say communicated, they say over communicated. But what I also really treasure is the value of understanding the shift in culture and not just again that top down but bottom up, and in understanding how managers are on the front lines, right, in terms of really noticing and seeing shifts and changes within their organization, within the individuals as it relates to their performance and as it relates to maybe their health and their different challenges. And so all of this is really great in terms of understanding those dynamics. But what's also beneficial and important to talk about is organizations having really understanding the value to training leaders, training managers, and all employees on how to navigate mental health at work. And so that in itself is about empowering individuals with information. And so when that happens, then you're creating a real norm within your workplace as relates to its discussion. And so when I go in as a trainer to different organizations and I talk about mental health at work or workplace well-being, it's wonderful to be able to hear from individuals as it relates to some of their challenges. But I value the fact that the organization really is thinking with great intention to support their team, to having me come on board to help and provide information to be able to support their team as it relates to workplace well-being. I also have learned to really value this is organizations that not only hire people like myself and then other organizations and individuals as it relates to training leaders and members of their team in regards to well-being, but then companies that are really proactive in collecting data as it relates to their team in terms of, facilitating surveys, finding out their mental health and finding out their workload and understanding more about some challenges and then understanding more about what they want to see. So even having this collective in terms of a survey dynamic, a questionnaire, being able to help gather intel, really impactful information that will help serve your team. And another way, of course, is making sure that you are doing the next tip that they share as it relates to serving your team, and that is having a more sustainable way of working. And they mentioned how this is a critical component, really, in providing flexibility for your team members, which many workers experience with remote work for the first time during the pandemic, right? And so they also noticed that respondents who reported their company's return to office plans were negatively impacting their mental health, right? So one of the things that I saw and I observed were individuals that were very uncomfortable or anxious about returning in person, because when you think about it, I mean, to go from trying to get accustomed to being in lockdown and working remotely to then all of a sudden, the doors are opening and the lights coming in, and that in itself is a transition period, opposed to, quickly going from, 0 to 100, but maybe understanding the ease of the dynamic and trying to go through that process. And so I can certainly understand how it can negatively impact a person's mental health in terms of making them feel anxious, making them, trying to understand this other new shift. I actually saw that also in the classroom as a college professor with students, how some were very uncomfortable being in person, while others were, ready to come back and being in person. But then when they were in person, they were still dealing with all these different challenges in the classroom, right? Especially if they end up actually getting COVID, getting a positive test result for COVID. And then all of a sudden, they are, in quarantine, and then they're trying to figure out how to juggle that workload of not being back in a classroom. It had so many different challenges and continues to have challenges. So I really value that they're sharing creating more sustainable ways of working. They say top two reasons are given were policies around in-person versus remote work, which is up in terms of 41%, and the lack of work-life balance or flexibility based on policy, which was 37% in terms of the data that they collected. So, one of the other things they mentioned, and will be the last thing we'll talk about in this podcast. And again, you can certainly go to drkortnialston.com/podcast/episode 87 to read the entire article. But they ended with talking about a deeper connection, which I think is also so important. And they say, culture of connection is key. Culture of connection is key. So from regular check-ins that make time and to ask this question. How about this question? They say the question of, can you guess what it is? The question of, how are you? How are you? Those three words are so important. How are you to healthy working relationships, to meaningful interactions among your teams? But how are you? And I love that they're sharing the value in terms of that, because it's so important to be able to have that conversation, to check in as it relates to your team, to understand, well, how are you? How is everything? How is this transition going from working remotely now to being in person? And it gives you an opportunity as a leader and manager to then be able to say, what can I do to support you? Or what can we begin to start doing within a company to support you? So how you are doing, which is a great question when I hear it from friends, even powerful when I hear it at work, right? How are you? And that, again, those three words, deeper connection, and really valuing the culture of connection. So one of the things that I also treasure that I want to end with is a quote directly from the article. And they say, the future of workplace mental health demands culture change with more vulnerability, compassion, and sustainable ways of working. End quote. The future of work, a workplace mental health demands culture change. It does. It does. Creating a culture that is going to be supportive, that is more vulnerable, that has compassion. And in this podcast, we've talked about compassionate work in terms of the research behind compassionate work, how it can help not only create this supportive dynamic, but sparks innovation. How about that? And then I love thinking about sustainable ways of working, right? Is thinking and looking and really being able to evaluate, is this good for this role? Is this good for this dynamic? Maybe we should shift things. In positive psychology, we have something called job crafting, and being able to kind of really cultivate and customize certain positions. I love that in terms of job crafting. One of the things I love about job crafting is like it allows us to really value and focus on strengths. What are the strengths that make up my team? What are the strengths that make up the individuals that are part of my team? And I also want to share something else. So as a college professor, when I am teaching students in the classroom, I do an activity that I love every semester. And what I have them do is I begin for them to learn about their strengths. And so I have them go to the Authentic Happiness website that's hosted by the University of Pennsylvania. And they take a VIA and character strength survey. So values in action, character strength survey. It's more than, I think, probably about a few hundred questions. And they take that survey, that questionnaire, and they leave learning what their top character strengths are. And we talk about them because we can often in our society talk about what we're weak on. Oh, well, you need to work on this. What I love so much about positive psychology is, well, let's look at our strengths. What do you do well? Let's see about going about leveraging that even more. And so what I love so much about workplace and mental health and thinking about and talking about it and bringing about the culture of change can be a great strength to an organization. And understanding your team individually can help in terms of really building a positive work environment within your organization. To learn more, again, go to drcourtneyalston.com/podcast/episode 87. Always remember, your well-being is your most important job. Thank you so much for listening. Let's continue this conversation online. Email us at podcast@drcourtneyalston.com. That's podcast@drcourtneyalston.com. Join us on Instagram at Courting Happiness. Don't forget, that's courting with a K. Also, I hope you join our private Facebook community. You can find us at Courting Happiness Podcast Community. Our private Facebook group is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Now, are you ready to spread happiness? We hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. Thank you so much for listening. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.